All right. Welcome, everyone. We are so glad to have all of you joining us this evening. We're trying something new by streaming on YouTube Live, so please bear with us as we navigate this new platform, hopefully without any technical glitches. You won't see or hear Beth Nunan, but she has been working tirelessly to make all of this technology work. So I just want to start out with a huge thank you to Beth. And we have a few other people working behind the scenes, moderating the chat, monitoring our Google Forms, and just making sure everything moves smoothly. So I just also want to thank Kris, Marie, and Natalya, who are working for us to make sure this gets to you tonight. My name is Anisha Gupta, and I'll be moderating our discussion tonight. I am a light brown skinned woman, and I have long black hair. I'm seated, and I'm wearing a brown sweater with a blue and pink patterned scarf, and my background is a white wall. I'd like to start out tonight with the land acknowledgement. I believe a land acknowledgement is about understanding our personal relationship with the land we are on and how we got here. So for me, both sides of my family originate in India, and on both sides, I am the first generation to be born on this territory, the unceded ancestral indigenous territory of the Lenni Lenape and Wingo-Hoking people of the Delaware watershed, who have stewarded these lands for centuries and continue to do so in these unceded territories now known as Philadelphia. I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Lenni Lenape and Wingo-Hoking communities, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. So please consider ways that you can support the Indigenous community in your area. If you are on Lenape land, you can learn about ways to support them by visiting lenape-nation.org. The event tonight is hosted by the Philadelphia Art Conservation Association, or PACA, and the American Institute for Conservation's Emerging Conservation Professionals Network, or ECPN. We've partnered to bring you this two-part program, our panel tonight and a second panel discussion next week. We've seen an incredible wave of museum unions recently, everywhere from the new museum in New York last year to the MFA Boston just recently. And at PACA and ECPN, we really wanted to learn more about this trend. What is a union? How did these workers manage to organize and unionize? How does unionizing affect your work? We had all of these questions, so we gathered together to bring all of these fabulous speakers to you tonight to help us answer some of those questions. So we're going to start with a short presentation from a couple of Philadelphia Museum of Art union organizers discussing how they unionized. Then we'll have a presentation from Nadia Ghani about unionizing in union work in action. And after that, we'll have a Q&A. So please put your questions in the chat, or if you look at the video description in your video feed, we have an anonymous form, so you can also fill that out, whatever you prefer. And we'll collect all the questions at the end, but keep them coming as we go along. So let us get started. We have two speakers from the Philadelphia Museum of Art Union, which recently unionized. Nicole Cook works as the program manager for graduate academic partnerships at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, where she facilitates programs in object-based study. She is also an art historian and curator with research interests in early modern art, and especially the role of women in early modern art and patronage. Nicole has a PhD from the University of Delaware and an MA from the Tyler School of Art, Temple University. She has been on the PMA Union Organizing Committee for over a year and is now also part of the Union Bargaining Committee. Lauren Woodring holds a BA in History and Political Science from Lebanon Valley College, an MA in History from LaSalle University, and an MLit in Museum Studies from the University of St. Andrews. She is a member of the Philadelphia Museum of Art Union's Organizing and Bargaining Committees. Additionally, she's on the board APRA Pennsylvania on the Chapter Committee for APRA International and a member of the Prospect Development Best Practices Committee for the Association of Advancement Services Professionals. She lives in Philadelphia with her cat. So I will turn it over now to Nicole and Lauren for their presentation.
Hi, thank you. I'm Lauren, and I like to mention the cat because we're all working from home, and she could really make an appearance at any time. So I'm going to start my presentation. I'm doing the first half, and then I'm going to move it over to Nicole. So we're going to talk to you a little bit today about the Philadelphia Museum of Art Union. We're relatively new, so we're going to talk to you about how we came together, why we unionized, how we unionized, and also where we are today. So we can go on the second slide about the PMA. So we're probably, most of you have heard of us. We're, especially if you're in the Philadelphia area, we're a pretty big encyclopedic museum with over 240,000 objects. We're old. We started in 1876, and we've been in our building since 1928. We're most famous for our building with the Rocky Steps in front, but we also have the Perlman building, which is actually where Nicole and I work, and sometimes we also have exhibits across the street. The Rodin Museum on the Parkway, where we have a smaller museum of artworks by the sculpture artist Rodin, and 2 historic houses. So we have a lot more going than just our building. We have about 300 employees at the moment, and it's a little tricky to tell. We lost about 45 this summer with layoffs and voluntary separations. And we're going to talk about this later, but we actually last week before, went through another round of furloughs, losing about 50 more coworkers, hopefully temporarily. So we're in a flux moment at the museum due to having to close right before Thanksgiving, due to an order by the mayor for our city, and also just a lot of staff turnover. So we're in a kind of weird place, but I think that a lot of museums and cultural institutions are also in that weird place too. All right, next slide. So how did we start unionizing conversations? Well, a lot of you in the art world probably remember the spreadsheet, right? That was from like last May. And it was started in part by curators at our museum. And so we were one of the first kind of museums, a lot of our fellow employees started putting in their salaries. And word kind of quickly spread, like, did you see the spreadsheet? Did you put your salary on it? Did you see like so-and-so's salary on there? And people really started looking at it and talking about it and seeing, that there were pretty big discrepancies in our field. Someone who has the same job within your institution, at another comparable institution, was maybe making significantly more or less than you were. And there hadn't really been this moment to talk about salary. It had been a pretty taboo subject. I mean, I can't imagine before the spreadsheet like ever telling anyone how much money I made, but this kind of opened it up in a way that made people, I think, feel comfortable. And so people start talking about the lack of transparency, how we don't have salary bands, no one has any idea what anyone's making, and equity at the PMA, seeing that 2 people in the same department who are doing really similar jobs are making really vast different sums of money. And it started to break down silos between just people, between departments, in a way that I don't think we'd had before. And so people just differently, organically started being like, oh, how can we change this? Is there anything we can do to just make things better here? And, I don't think the unionizing was necessarily the first thought, but it definitely came to mind, once we started thinking about our options, because we'd seen that other museums have unions and there is more salary transparency. They have salary bands like most universities do. So you kind of can know, a range of what people are making, and or you can apply for a job and kind of have an idea of what you might make before you apply, sort of like radical things in our world. And so those conversations, I think, were probably happening in almost every department, and then people just kind of grew it from there. And so I think that's kind of our first place we started. But if you want to go to the next slide, there's definitely other issues besides just the transparency spreadsheet. So some of you might remember in the beginning of 2020, we had pretty quickly 2 big news stories break about our museum. They both involved male supervisors who had sexually and physically and verbally harassed and abused their staff. They both had been reported to other staff members, to HR. Nothing had really happened. They were allowed to keep their jobs for years, promoted, given a lot of power and say in the museum. One of them got to do a much bigger job at another museum without any, and it was really horrible. And I think that these are kind of open secrets. So people who kind of might have heard rumors about it, just hearing the full scope of it, it was really upsetting. And I even know some staff who, had not heard of this at all. They were newer, or maybe they just like worked in different departments. And so coming to work and finding out that this had been going on for years was really horrible moment. That I don't think we're not over it. I don't think we'll ever be over it, but it really was kind of like the worst day at work was that day when we were, walked in after the New York Times article dropped. And people were like, how can this happen? How can these people have gotten away with this for so long and nothing happened? And, that kind of also people started thinking about union as a third party where, if you go to HR and nothing is happening about someone, where else do you go? So this was kind of the logic right now. We also have a lot of problems that I think are pretty normal in cultural field in general, low pay, high turnover. I work in development. I've been there for almost 4 years. And I bet we're a pretty big department, 30 to 40 people. And I would say over half of the people have changed since I've been there. 4 years is not really that long, but people leave for better opportunities. There's not really room for advancement, unless your boss decides to retire or leave, you're stuck. You're not going to get paid more. You're not going to get a job title increase. You are stuck doing that job until you decide to leave. So I think that that's been really frustrating. We've also had problems that are really specific to current COVID-19. We had to shut down. We're shut down again. We had pay cuts, pretty much museum-wide for about 3 months. Furloughs, layoffs. It's been a frustrating place to work. And we also had a tone-deaf Black Lives Matter statement from museum administration. If you saw any of the coverage in Philadelphia, a lot of the protests were happening literally on the museum steps. And then to get this sort of really horrible message that really implied that we're so lucky that nothing happened to the building, but not really mentioning the reason why people were protesting, I think really hurt the feelings of almost everyone I talked to about it. And so just really made people realize that there wasn't much accountability or transparency going on at the museum. So there's a lot of people have different reasons for unionizing or for deciding to support a union, but I think we had a lot of different things happening at the museum at the same time that gave people a lot to think about when they had the chance to decide if they wanted to vote for a union. All right, next slide, please. All right, this is a picture of me in my fun quarantine pants right after I dropped off my ballot to vote for the union. I was very excited. So we're going to talk now about how we affiliated with the union and kind of our early steps. So like I said, we'd had these small conversations in departments, and then they kind of grew as people started talking to their friends in other departments. We made the decision that we would try to unionize and kind of see where it went. I came in a little bit later in the process because my job is super siloed. I didn't know Nicole except as someone I would say hello to in the elevator until I started this union process. And we work in the same building pretty close to each other. So it was hard to kind of get people who have more isolated jobs involved. But once we started having larger conversations and meetings, people realized this was something we wanted to do and we wanted to go forward with the process and see if we could make it work. We decided after talking to a bunch of unions in Philadelphia, New York, around the area, to see if we could affiliate with them, to affiliate with AFSCME DC 47. You can form your own union, but we decided that was just too much for us. None of us are lawyers. None of us have really formed a union before. So we needed a lot of help. So we decided to go with AFSCME, and they do represent other museums, but there are a lot of other unions representing museums and other cultural and white-collar traditional workers. So there's a lot out there right now, which is pretty cool to see. We decided once we voted to affiliate, we kind of thought that we would get to go public in a month and realized that we were a lot further behind in this whole thing than we thought. So we started kind of organizing a lot more systematically. We had charts. We had 1,000 charts. We started making sure we were talking to every coworker, seeing what they thought, because if the rest of your coworkers are not interested, it's not going to work because they're going to vote no. So we really wanted to make sure this was something that the majority of our fellow employees really wanted. And, if they had questions, if they had concerns or reservations, that we could really address them on kind of a one-to-one peer scale. So we really each took like a group of names of people we knew and really tried to be that contact person for them, which I think was successful. And Nicole will talk about that more. But next slide. So before we decided to go public, we really wanted to make sure we had support. So we made sure about 65% of union eligible bargaining unit employees had said that they would vote yes. So that made us feel confident. We wrote a mission statement just to say how homegrown it was. It was like literally in my living room where I'm sitting now. So this is all it's not fancy. We wrote this mission statement and people signed it. And then we had a list of people who had signed it so people could kind of see and sign it themselves. So there was this kind of building this solidarity, building this group of people who was interested. People felt like they weren't alone, that like we were all kind of in it together. And then we had to sign authorization cards, which the National Labor Review Board requires you to sign before you can have a vote. And we really made sure that we had as many people sign those cards as possible. Unfortunately, we were like signing them the day of like the shutdown because of COVID. So that part was a little tricky, but we really wanted to make sure the key thing was that, we weren't just doing this because it was a group of like 20 people who wanted it. We wanted to do this because it was most of the people who were union eligible wanted it. And we really made sure that we were talking to people, hearing their concerns, inviting them to meetings, inviting them to one-on-one. We emailed people, all kinds of things. So that was really, before we even went public, we made sure that we had our support. And next slide. So we had to take a pause because of COVID. So we filed for our election in May, which triggered an election. It took longer than it probably would have in non-COVID times in part because the National Labor Review Board had to figure out how to do it virtually too. We were all kind of like flying blind. So we, on May 22nd, we filed for an election. We sent the statement to management to tell them that we planned to unionize, and we had a super majority of people who were behind us. We had hoped that they would voluntarily recognize us. They did not, but that's always the hope. And we launched our website. We went to the press with a press announcement. We went live on our Twitter and Instagram. We really put out the word in 5 minutes. And then we really started to activate our network of support with, other artists, other people who work for the city, and just really tried to get out the vote so that we were still in constant communication with our fellow staff. And I'm going to turn it over to Nicole.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. And so happy to be here. So I think that takes us to our next slide about our challenges, which Lauren got into, and I'll talk a little bit more about. So we did not anticipate completing our campaign, our union campaign, during an unforeseen global pandemic that caused all sorts of different logistical problems. Literally, the last thing I did before the last day I was in my office was I left work and I collected a couple more of those authorization cards and went home expecting to go in the next week. And then everything changed. So we really, we had to take a pause at that point because as Lauren was talking about, this has really been a democratic process from beginning to current. And so after the shutdown happened and talk of furloughs and pay cuts was starting, we really felt that we owed it to our supporters, to people who had been involved and who we had been talking about, who would be our future members, to make sure that everyone was still on board with moving forward, because you will not have a successful union campaign if everyone's not involved and on board and positive about moving forward with the process. So that was, again, another opportunity where we spent a lot of time having one-on-one conversations and learning even more about what people were worried about, not even in terms of pre-COVID, but just recently, how long were pay cuts going to be in effect? Who were they affecting? And how was this information being communicated? Like many large museums, we're a very top-down and hierarchical place where information is really held at the top and takes much longer to reach the rest of us and the workers who are impacted by these decisions as well. Lauren mentioned also we had been very hopeful that the museum might voluntarily recognize our union, which would have allowed us to move much faster. They instead felt the need to trigger an election. So that's the route that we went, which added time and additional efforts and processes of moving forward with the election, particularly as a mail-in election, which had been fairly uncommon before 2020. And then we also learned that immediately or very quickly after we announced our intent to move forward with an election and our request for voluntary recognition, that the museum had contracted with Morgan Lewis Law Firm, which is known as a law firm that specifically handles something that's called union avoidance, which is a management perspective on avoiding unions at all cost, and when they cannot be avoided, limiting their power as much as possible. So some of the strategies that are used by management in this sense of union avoidance have to do with trying to divide workers into smaller subsets and smaller units within a union, again, to limit their bargaining power, their negotiating power, so that in that case, you're all on staggered contracts, so you can't support one another in the same way when you're pushing for a new contract or a first contract. And we had made the decision really early on that we wanted to be a truly wall-to-wall union, and that was our commitment. And by wall-to-wall, that just means that every eligible worker in every department becomes part of the union, is eligible for the union, so that we didn't want to have a smaller union in one department or a couple of departments and then leave people out on the other side of that. And then we started, as is also really common as a management tactic, hearing a lot of communications from the museum leadership, upper management, about that were framed as helpful Q&A materials, sort of helpful materials on the union, but the materials themselves were included a lot of known anti-union talking points about we're a family here, we wouldn't want to break that up, why would you want a third party to come in and get in between relationships between upper management and workers. Once you kind of learn the talking points, they're almost copy and pasted from one campaign to another. When the reality was at every point, this was a union effort by PMA workers for PMA workers. We decided to organize ourselves. We sought out our affiliate. They didn't seek us out. We were very proactive in maintaining this as a really worker-driven campaign. And I know that's not necessarily the case in every union campaign, but it has been for us, and it's been really important to us. So next slide, please. So in order to respond to this type of communication and response from management with hiring the known anti-union law firm and all of the communications they were putting out, we really sought to respond to that by being in really close touch with our future members, with our union supporters, our coworkers. We continued at every stage of the campaign a lot of one-on-one communication, and I learned so much from every single every single conversation that I've had with a coworker about their job, about their needs, what they want to see the museum be in terms of a healthy workplace. So providing opportunities for people to be in listening sessions, have opportunities to have one-on-one conversations, and have really open lines of communications. Our meetings were always open to anyone who wanted to attend. And we also really sought out the support of our city partners, local politicians and city representatives, local artists and in the Philadelphia art scene, supporters, members, donors to the museum were another population that we really sought out support from. And we did that by activating our personal networks, by sending email zaps, and creating easy ways for our supporters to send messaging to management and the board. We have a very active social media campaign that Lauren is really a really key part of, and they do such great work at like all aspects of the union. It's a team effort, but we're lucky to have people who are really adept at using social media to get the word out about us and also connect to our community partners and other unionizing efforts. So at various points, we kind of activated that network and asked for people to sign on to letters or send letters themselves. And next slide, please. And along the way, I think it's important to note that very few of us had ever been part of a union before, and none of us had been professional organizers. So we might sound like we're using, lingo or union-specific vocabulary. This has all been learned in the past year. None of us were professional organizers before this, and we learned it all along the way while we were actively organizing. And along with that, we picked up some best practices that we really try to keep central to our work. Our proactive communication strategy, both internally to our members and externally to our supporters, larger community. Another thing that we really learned is the importance of delegating work across different teams and spreading out that workload to avoid burnout. It is a lot to ask people to volunteer to form a union on top of their day-to-day work and on top of their lives, and especially since everyone's lives have changed a lot in the past several months. So having a lot of cross-training, training in general, open door policy on coming to meetings, and then also an open door policy on when people need to step back. As Lauren was saying, that people have lives and things change, and we have always welcomed people in and been happy for people to step aside and come back. And that's been a really important part of creating a really robust organizing committee and all of the different subcommittees that work on things like social media and communications and other aspects of our work. So Lauren and I are here, but we are part of an incredibly robust team of many, many people that allow this work to happen. And next slide, please. So then we get to our election and our win. It was a very exciting day. It was probably one of the most exciting Zoom experiences I've ever had. And when the votes were counted on August 6th, we won our election with 181 yes votes and 22 no votes. This was from a group of not what's called non-contested votes, where it's very clear that the worker is eligible for the union. We also have a group of about 45 people who the museum leadership or upper management is claiming have supervisory status, which would make them ineligible. And these are people who our position is that they are very much eligible and should receive the protections of the union. So that's something that we're currently still in negotiations about. So those votes were not included because the majority was so overwhelmingly large that even if they had been counted, it wouldn't have made a difference to the final win. And so that was a really validating and exciting moment where we really knew we had the support of our coworkers to move forward. And then we actually had a union. Next slide, please. So where are we now? We are in a bit of a gray area in that we have a union, but we do not have many of the elements that go along with a more established union. We are still meeting with museum representatives about starting to negotiate our contract language. We are still in the process of just trying to reach a meeting of the minds about these contested positions, people who we think are eligible union members, but the museum is contesting. And then there are these newer issues of in the continuing merry-go-round that is public space and cultural institutions in 2020 and during the pandemic with our current closure that immediately and very unexpectedly led to a large number of newly furloughed staff who we've been told will be called back to work when we reopen in January, but there's not been a lot of specific information around that. Sorry, I lost my train of thought for 1 second. Yes, I just wanted to say that even though we have a lot left to do, your average union contract can take up to a year or 18 months to be ratified, to be completed. We also think that this is a really exciting moment when finally, as workers and as staff who really care about this institution a lot and really want it to be Philadelphia's art museum in the truest sense, are able to sit down with upper management, with museum representatives, and really talk about our goals for our own workplace and also our goals for the museum. So there's a lot of work left to be done, but we're feeling in a really strong and good and robust position moving forward. And next slide, please. So we wanted to conclude our presentation by giving a shout out to examples of other museums that currently have unions. Some new ones like the newly announced MFA Boston, we were very excited to hear about. There's also an older history of museum unions that one might think, including MoMA, but also the Met. There's also been some really recent in the past year or two great activity with the new Children's Museum, Milwaukee Art Museum, Fry, MoCA. It's been so exciting, and we've really tried to keep ourselves really connected and open to other more nascent union efforts who are maybe folks that are just starting out, and we've had a lot of great kind of cross-institutional, cross-union conversations that have been just really galvanizing and exciting to see. And next slide, please. And there are also campaigns that are actively in place right now that are unfolding. In Pennsylvania, our colleagues at the Carnegie are pursuing their union, Portland Museum of Art and Walker, and also there are many other union campaigns that aren't as public yet or aren't as far along, but we really anticipate the next couple of years having even more exciting news about unionizing in the cultural sector. And next slide, please. So finally, I'm sure that there will be an ability to share this out afterwards, but we make our contact information really available. And as I said, we're really happy to talk with other museum cultural colleagues curious about unions at absolutely any stage of the conversation. And thank you so much. And I think I'll hand things back to Anisha now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole and Lauren. Thanks to everyone that's been adding questions in the chat. Please continue to do so for Nicole and Lauren, and we'll get them in a little bit, or you can use the anonymous form, which is in our video description. So I'll now introduce our final panelist, Nadia. Nadia Philomena Ghani is an MBA MPP candidate at Mills College, where she earned a double bachelor's in art history and French and Francophone studies in 2008. She had a decade-long career as an exhibition registrar in fine art museums, which culminated in successful union salary negotiations and participation in 3 strategic planning committees. She's currently working at Howe Fine Art Services as they transition to a cooperative structure. She's an artist and Francophile who loves collecting photography and used books with a penchant for mid-century architecture and design. Go ahead, Nadia. You're muted.
There we go. Hey, everybody. My name's Nadia Philomena Ghani. I'm currently in Oakland speaking to you from the land of the Chochenyo-speaking Muwekma Ohlone people. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I have brown hair, brown eyes, and behind me are a plant and an abstract painting. So I'm here to talk to you today about successful union salary negotiations between the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco and SEIU Local 10-1 that took place between September 2017 and May 2019. Next slide. So the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco is actually 2 museums. The DeYoung Museum, which is located in Golden Gate Park, has 2 special exhibition galleries, 3 conservation labs, and 4 collection departments. And then it's also the Legion of Honor Museum, which is located in Lincoln Park, has 1 special exhibition gallery, ongoing contemporary interventions, 1 conservation lab, and 4 collection departments. And now for an overview of the FAMASEF, next slide. An overview of the FAMASEF labor landscape. So at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco, you have both the union and merit employees. On the union side, you have city union employees and SEIU 10-1 union employees. On the merit side, you have non-management and then management and executive leadership. And then curatorial and conservation fall within the non-management merit side for reference. Next slide. So FAMASEF union positions within SEIU 10-1 are listed on the left-hand side. And for context, previously negotiated salary benefits were an annual 3% cost of living adjustment, annual 5% pay increase between steps up to 5 years, and a 5-year collective bargaining agreement. And I understand that for a lot of you that maybe aren't in a union or just starting a union, those might sound like great baselines to work towards. But I can tell you that I was working there 10 to 12 hours a day with a 3-hour commute and had 50% of a living wage. So it just goes to show you that even within an existing union structure, you're still going to have to fight and advocate for better conditions. Next slide. So an overview of our timeline. In November of 2017, our collective bargaining team was identified. And then the technicians, registrars, and exhibitions departments assembled to identify concerns and goals that we wanted to bring up in bargaining. In January of 2018, collective bargaining begins for the entire union. And then by March of 2018, due to the attorney's illness, collective bargaining is very behind schedule. Management refuses to negotiate salaries. So with pressure from our team, our union rep filed a side letter guaranteeing that management would meet to discuss wages for technicians, registrars, and exhibitions. In June of 2018, collective bargaining ends without having negotiated salaries, and bargaining team for technicians, registrars, exhibitions, wage table, or TRUE, as we branded it, was identified. By November, side letter negotiations start for TRUE, and in April of 2019, they end. So a couple of key points I'd like to bring up on this slide. One is that in March of 2019, I was promoted to a management position, which meant that I had to be removed immediately from the negotiating bargaining team. As such, today I won't be able to present to you any of the final findings or results of the bargaining because I was not actually there or present. What I will be able to show you is the research and work that went into the presentation and then the negotiations themselves. Another key thing to point out on the timeline slide is that all of this takes time. As Lauren and Nicole just pointed out, a lot of this is a very slow process, and you have to be patient and just work together and believe that if you keep working together, change will come about. For example, we set out to have the side letter negotiations start in July, but they actually didn't end up starting until November. And that wasn't because anybody was trying to delay actively. It was just that the schedules of the groups and vacations, and then the special exhibition installation schedule were such that we weren't going to be able to meet until November. So be patient, but push on. Next slide. So steps to successful bargaining. Research. You want to identify a clear set of realistic goals and objectives. Then gather data and statistics that support your agenda. You want to campaign. Like Nicole and Lauren said, you need to share what you're doing with those directly and indirectly involved. It's incredibly important for everybody to be on the same page. And then inform. Explain the current climate that brought you to the table. Add context to the negotiations. And then when you're negotiating, don't back down. Next slide. Research. So it was really important for us to do research about our 3 key points that we wanted to negotiate, which were salaries, turnover, and staffing. Staffing survey, we sent out a staffing survey that we developed, which was sent out to similar sized museums so that we could be comparing apples to apples, so to speak. So we got data from LACMA, the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, MoMA, and SF MoMA. And then pay, industry pay rates. We looked at the AAM 2017 salary survey to see how we compared to local, regional, and national pay rates for these departments and roles. And then market research on general cost of living and for-profit comparisons. Next slide. The campaign. So initially, we put up flyers with snapshots of the staffing survey comparisons in the technician's, art handler's office, and the registrar's office. This way, when people from other departments, curatorial, conservation, administration, would come through, they could see the amount of work that we were doing compared with the staffing that we had compared to other institutions of similar size. And this is all in the lead up to a broader campaign. Then we had Sticker or Button Tuesday. So in solidarity with our bargaining team, that we wore stickers every Tuesday during bargaining. And it was a way for us all to just come together and have a visual presence also for those not involved in the bargaining, or maybe not even in the union, to be aware of what was going on. And then we sent an email to non-union employees. We emailed non-union colleagues in curatorial and conservation so they could understand what we were doing and what we needed. Inform. You want to clear, next slide. So you want a clear agenda for bargaining. Since this wasn't collective bargaining, we were able to narrow our focus to a specific group and that specific group's needs, which was salary, staffing, and turnover. We also wanted to give a description or some understanding about who we are. There's a broad lack of understanding in the industry about what this group of museum workers does and how important the work that they do is. Then context and culture. HR and the attorney may believe that they have an understanding of what it's like to work below deck, but the realities are usually very different, and providing those anecdotes or conditions, stories about your conditions, provides real context at the bargaining moment. And then union membership. During bargaining and during side letter negotiations, we had regular union meetings with pizza lunches to help keep everybody informed. It was a way to just get everybody in the same room and talk it out, hear how people are doing, and just have an opportunity for cross-departmental interaction, because otherwise in a museum setting, that very rarely happens. And then bargaining at the table. So for True, we had our union next slide. True, we had our union representative, our technician shop steward, the museum registrar, and the exhibitions assistant. And then we had the director of human resources from the Fine Arts Museums across the table from us, along with the museum attorney. It's at this point that I'd like to bring up a key point as to why I think we were so successful as well. And that is because at the time of our side letter negotiations, there was 2 key staff changes. The director of human resources changed and the director of the museum changed. And the changes in those 2 personnel in particular really allowed us to have momentum and where we wanted to go. So now I'll hop into the presentation that we gave to HR and the attorney, and then was shared with leadership. Next slide. So True bargaining. Technicians, registrars, exhibitions, wage table. Next slide. So what happened? Base rates were significantly reduced in 2012, and wage increases had not kept up with cost of living, nor realigned with financial stability of the organization, nor adjusted to industry standards. Additionally, in that time, exhibition activity doubled, an entirely new curatorial department was added, and cost of living in the Bay Area increased to be the highest in the country. Next slide. Quality of life. Inflation in the Bay Area is above 3% a year. The Consumer Price Index lists a comfortable salary as $123,268 to live in San Francisco and $95,611 to live comfortably in Oakland. At the time, going into negotiations, the highest salary that we had in our group was $62,000. So that's less than 50% of a living salary. In addition to that, we had commutes of 2 to 4 hours a day and an unhealthy work environment. So who were we? We had 18 technicians, 4 registrars, and 5 people from exhibitions. We represented 29% of the overall union membership, a very specialized skill set. And from our research, we found that we were 50% less staffed than museums of our size. Next slide. What do? We service 8 curatorial departments and their acquisitions, gallery rotations, and outgoing loans. We manage 5 touring exhibitions a year and 900 special incoming loans a year. We're responsible for storage at the De Young, Legion of Honor, and off-site, and that is both art and warehouse storage. And of course, we do this all in service of not 1, but 2 museums. So what do we want? We want to address wage and inequity disparities of internal departments in the museum. Like Nicole and Lauren pointed out, this is a huge problem, even when you're in a union institution. We want a clear career path with members being accurately acknowledged for tenure and skill set. And we want to address systemic issues such as turnover that affect the department's HR and the budget. Next slide. So after this brief intro about who we were, some little context and background, then we broke it down by department. So we had technicians, exhibitions, and registration each present specific issues from this group of pointing to specific anecdotes of which things were going wrong in their department or where they felt their department needed help the most. And in that way, we could break up this entirely like laundry list and make it actually more personable and tangible to the real situations. And then it's just not a list of issues. Then we had each department pull out some specific anecdotes about some of the more specialized skill sets that are required in these departments. So we went into a long story about mount making for a Teotihuacan exhibition and how hard that was. And then an overview of the department. So there's 18 total in the department, 9 have exhausted step growth, all are SEIU, 11 have left the museum since 2012. So in this department, 9 have exhausted step growth means that half of the department is no longer receiving their annual raise. Registration, again, diving into some specialized skill sets, and then looking at an overview of the department. 7 total in the department, 1 has exhausted step growth, 4 SEIU, and 6 have left the department since 2012. So in this instance, I think that this is a really great snapshot because you're seeing a department size of 7 and 6 people leaving in 6 years. So that's a really important to see all those numbers together. And then exhibitions, specialized skill set, and then an overview of the department. Sorry, next slide. Staffing survey. Our staffing survey summary, we were 30 to 50, from our research, we discovered and confirmed that we're 30 to 50% less staffed in technicians and registration departments. And COFAM uniquely has no department administrators. Next slide. Technicians. So here's the staffing comparisons between art handlers at MoMA, LACMA, SFO, and MFAH, and FAMSF. And then registration. Next slide. MoMA 16, LACMA 16, SF MoMA 19, MFAH 14, FAMSF 7. So again, these are the flyers that we printed and posted up in our department offices so that our colleagues could see the level of work that we're doing with the staffing that we have. Next slide. And then our wage and classification survey. We got this data. Again, we were negotiating before the Art and Museum Transparency spreadsheet was even existed. I would have loved to have been able to have access to that during this negotiations, but alas, we muddled it together from job postings, the AMD 2017 salary survey, and industry colleagues. And from that, we found that we're 30 to 50% underpaid for the industry and for the region, and that the financial recognition of value commensurate to skill set and responsibility in the organization is off kilter. So for example, the help desk technician is making $28 an hour, and an art handler is making $21 an hour. Next slide. So here's where you can see the data pretty clearly. An art handler at the Fine Arts Museums is making $23 an hour. Across the city, the Asian Art Museum, which is only one museum, half our size, is making almost $3 more an hour. And then you look at the AMD mean, which is almost $30 an hour. And that's based on museums of our size and our region. Next slide. Senior technician, same thing. Significantly less than a smaller size museum within our own city. And then you compare it to New York MoMA. These technicians are doing the same exact work, and we're getting paid 50% less below a living wage. And at the time, New York's cost of living was actually less than San Francisco's. Next slide. Assistant registrar. So here we are again, a little bit better, at least we're above the Asian Art Museum, but still compared to national or even SF MoMA, we're significantly lower. Next slide, a registrar. Here we have a registrar making roughly $62,000, $64,000 a year in a city where it costs $123,000 to live. Next slide. So the results. At the end of the day, we did succeed in going from the lowest to highest paid museum workers in the city of San Francisco. And that isn't anything to laugh at. That is a significant increase, but it's still isn't enough for what the departments need. And when you're talking about diversity or equity inclusion, it's not anywhere close. Another great result was that we laid groundwork with HR and the attorneys to address systemic issues within the division. Next slide. So some conclusions. Unions, while empowering, are not the only solution. And museums cannot address these systemic issues with existing structures and leadership. Even had the director and head of HR, who I believe actually genuinely wanted to see us succeed and help us go as far as we could, they had real limits to their funding models and structures to be able to actually invoke real change within their organization. Next slide. So unions are not the only solution. Currently, there's no union with the sole purpose of representing museum workers. There's currently no union system. The current union system is great for local representation and solidarity, but fails in uniting a national labor force. The current union system is also broken with overworked and underpaid union representatives. This results in unpaid labor by staff who are organizing, bargaining, or acting as shop stewards, burnout. And then because it's localized, we're missing the opportunity to set national and international standards. Next slide. So we are trying to build a Museum Workers Guild. I'm working with my co-founder of the Museum Workers Guild to find solutions to some of these problems. We're starting to have meetings and conversations with other groups that are already organizing. Our first step is gathering data. We want to know who you are, what you need, and to that end, we're releasing a survey today, encouraging everyone to share and participate as we get this up and running. We have the option to add your email if you want to contact us or stay in touch. And then as the survey develops and as this project coalesces, we will be reaching out to keep you informed. Anyways, next slide. Take the survey, museumworkersguild.org/survey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadia, and to all our speakers. We are running a little long right now, and we're getting a lot of great questions in the chat. So I just wanted to ask Nadia, Nicole, and Lauren if you're okay going a little bit after 9 p.m. Eastern. Okay. Great. So we'll have about 10 or 15 minutes for some questions, so keep them coming. And this is being recorded, so if you need to jump off, you can catch up with the video, and we'll try to follow up as well with Google Doc with some resources and any questions we can't get to. So thank you so much to the three of you for sharing all of that. That was so much great information. And I can tell with the questions that we're getting that people, some people are thinking broadly and some people are thinking very specific. So we have some people who I think are thinking a lot about these issues. So I think I'm going to start with a few kind of just like logistical questions that are coming up so we make sure everyone's understanding. One of the first questions was, can you explain what union eligible means? So what kinds of employees would be ineligible?
Yeah, or Lauren, did you?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, this was all, like I said, this was all a learning process for us as not being part of a pre-existing union and starting this new effort. So this comes down to national and state labor law, rooting back to the National Labor Relations Act. So the intent of the act is to create a separation between upper management, leadership, the management that's really holding up the voice and the intent and the position of the institution or the company, and separating that population from the population of workers who are implementing the work of the institution, but who don't have that kind of management authority and agency. So it can be a bit of a gray area, also because this is going back to the early 20th century when work looked really different than it does now, and when separations around hierarchy and specialization and technical skill were just different than they are now. So our position as Philadelphia Museum of Art Union is that our eligible workers include all departments and include workers in positions who range from kind of an entry level or very junior staff level positions through middle management. I think it's important to say that just because internally someone is referred to as a manager or a supervisor within kind of their day-to-day work with an institution does not necessarily mean that that position meets the National Labor Relations Act intent of what management is. So as we both said, that we do have this group of positions that are still being contested, that we are still negotiating around. And so it can be a bit of a process. The only other group of employees who would not be eligible, or the only other groups of employees who would not be eligible other than managers are in most cases a specific security officer, security force. And that's because generally, like in an extreme scenario, if there was a strike happening, security would be beholden to uphold the voice of the institution, not the workers. So generally, security are represented by their own union, and that's the case at the PMA as well. And then the last group are this usually pretty small group of employees who are designated as somehow confidential. So someone like an assistant to an executive director or something like that, or an assistant to head of finance, someone who would really have a lot of sensitive information, be handling a lot of sensitive information that would have to do with management and leadership intent. So I hope that's not an overly complicated way of explaining it, but really, in most cases, it comes down to that management versus non-management, and so that's kind of where we are in the process right now.
Okay, that's really helpful because we also got a question just asking about the staff makeup at the PMA / in the union. So does the museum subcontract any work? So are there security guards, facility staff, food service staff, etc. in the union? So you started talking about situation with security guards.
Yeah, I can answer that one if you like. So we have security guards who are employed by the museum, but most of them are contracted through Allied Barton, a pretty popular security company. And our cleaning staff is subcontracted out. Our food services is subcontracted out. And our carpenters are already in like the Philadelphia Carpenter Union. They're subcontracted through that union. So those are staff who are not employed by the museum, so they are not union eligible. If your paycheck is not coming from the museum, you're not eligible for the PMA union.
Great, thanks, Lauren. Do you think that the funding breakdown for an institution has an effect on the group's ability to unionize?
I can try. I work in fundraising, so I can try to break that down. You see, I'm not sure exactly how to best answer it, but you see a lot of museums of different sizes unionizing and with different budgets and different funding streams. And like most museums, our funding streams comes from a variety of places. So I don't think that really impacted our ability to unionize. I don't know if a museum that is funded differently, like if they're funded through the city or university, or like they get the majority of their funding from like one foundation, might make it trickier, but it wasn't an issue for us.
Okay. So we had a number of questions that were sort of getting at like getting started with the union, but I think also fears of starting a union, or just maybe I think anticipating pushback from management and things like that. And you, Lauren and Nicole, you were talking about that a bit. So did you expect pushback from management, and why or why not? And how did that factor into your plans while you were initially organizing?
Yeah, I think I think we did expect pushback. I think that the PMA is an old institution with a long history, and I think the fact that no union effort had been successful thus far really set the tone. I mean, we had heard inklings here and there that there had been unionizing conversations in the past, but they had not been successful or had been quashed or just hadn't been able to continue for one reason or another. So yeah, I think that we were very aware of that. Our affiliate was also really helpful, AFSCME, in helping. They kind of paired us with a professional organizer who's really been guiding us through the whole process, and they were able to do a lot of training on and what's called inoculation, which teaching you the anti-union talking points and kind of the common management tactics for opposing union efforts. And they can take very many different forms, and they might even come from managers, supervisors, staff who you really respect and have really great relationships. And that has been hard to navigate, but we've just really taken strength in numbers and solidarity in numbers and a real attitude of we're all in this together. We need to be strong as a group, and keeping open lines of communication with our union members so that we can kind of try to get ahead or respond very immediately to tactics that are coming from management.
Yeah.
So you brought, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. We also talked to a lot of other colleagues at different museums who had unionized before us and had heard their experiences and their various tactics their management had used. So we kind of had like a baseline of what might happen to us, which was really helpful. And kind of in return, we've been also talking to museums who are in the process of unionizing and letting them know what happened. So it's kind of this cool, someone I heard say like a whisper network of museums who are interested in unionizing have really been helping each other out. So we really had support kind of knowing what might come from other museums who had done it before.
So you guys were both bringing up the union that you decided to affiliate with, AFSCME, and there was a question about how you choose the union, what union to affiliate with, and the asker is asking, we are concerned about the larger unions having problematic leadership and being unresponsive to rank and file. So I thought I would start this question with Nadia, since you have been part of a union, with FAMCIF has had this history with the union. So if you could respond to that.
Yeah, it's a tough question. I think it depends on the union, honestly. I wouldn't want to make a broad stroke statement. I think that some unions are probably doing a better job than others. I will say that our union was so large that we didn't feel any support from our union, right? And also the workers that are in our union are frontline medical professionals, right? So what they're asking for and their needs, when put in perspective with our own, is just it's hard. It's hard to try to earn and garner or like negotiate for that space in that setting. So I found it problematic because I felt like we weren't being heard by our union. We didn't really have the support of the union. And not only that, but our union rep didn't have the support of the union. They were overworked, just as much as we were overworked. And I was like, how can this person help me if they barely have the help themselves? So that's from my perspective, there's room for improvement.
I think we had the opposite in that we were able to shop around, which helped us a lot. And we found that at least the AFSCME District Council, where in Philadelphia, represents the zoo, the library, the Penn Library. So they had represented white collar workers as some adjuncts at different universities. So they really had workers that might not work in a museum, but had jobs a little closer to what we did. And our union organizer, he specifically before this had organized adjuncts. So people who might have more similar backgrounds and workloads that we did. And that was part of the reason we chose AFSCME, because we thought that they had experience that it was at least close enough to ours to make sense. We talked to unions that had no kind of experience in the cultural world and thought that while they were very nice and supportive and excited for us, it wasn't going to work out. And they even told us, like, know what we're doing with you guys. So, like, we don't think you should unionize with us. So I think we had, like, the opposite experience in Nadia. And so I think it really is just union to union. And if you're, like, looking to unionize, really talking to union representatives is really going to be the way to go, and kind of like interviewing them like you would interview, a new employee, just kind of try to see what they can offer you.
Great. So we just have a few minutes left. So I just want to ask one final question, which is, unions are obviously not perfect. We're talking about furloughs and layoffs that are still happening at the PMA, and of course in other museums. So Nadia, I was wondering if you could talk maybe a little bit about the union versus like a museum workers guild, or if you could talk a little bit more about, someone's asking, it would be great to know more about the museum workers guild. How would they succeed over museum administration? And I guess just generally, are unions enough? Do we need more than unions?
Sure, great. Yeah, I'd love to jump into that. I don't think unions are enough, because I think in my experience and what I'm seeing is there is a real limit to what these structures can accomplish with their current leadership, with their current funding models. And you're also seeing this in, COVID has made this even more clear, right? This is a completely untenable situation, and something has to change. At the same time, you can have all of this organizing and labor movement within unions, within museums. But if the institutions themselves aren't also changing or aren't also trying to be nimble to change, then you're only going to get so far. And I think also what we're seeing is institutions or organizations like AAM or AMD are really serving the institutions. They're not serving the laborers. So what I envision with the Museum Workers Guild, what we envision is a membership, and then also, a way of holding museums accountable, right? There has to be another way to hold museums accountable for this entire industry to shift in a different path. So that's kind of in thinking about the guild. Now, difference between a union and a guild. Union has very different legal requirements. A guild, by definition, is a collective of specialized skill set of workers, right? So if you think of the Screen Actors Guild or the Directors Guild, what they're doing is they're going in and they're pre-vetting contracts or production companies and saying, this is pre-approved. It is okay to work here. We've gone in and said that they will take care of you. Right now, there's nobody doing that on the side of labor. And you're never going to get there with just unions. So that's kind of the distinctions I see.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in there, like I think Lauren and I were both really excited to be on this panel with Nadia and talking about the Museum Worker Guild, because I think that it's not an either or, it's like a yes and more situation. Workers are American workers in general, and museum workers in particular, have been so disenfranchised for so long. We really need to go at this from multiple pathways and multiple strategies and angles. So just to say that I think that we're excited at the PMAU moving forward to think about how our union can partner with other unions, other guild, efforts like Museum Workers Guild, to really get more of a national conversation going. Oh, Anisha, we can't hear you.
Thank you. I was going to say that is a wonderfully optimistic place, I think, to leave this conversation. Looking forward, I think, at just our field organizing and really empowering one another. So I really want to thank Nadia, Lauren, and Nicole so much for being on our panel, and for all of the work that you've already done, and for the work that you'll continue to do. We've been sharing links for the PMA Union in the chat, so check it out. Find all the ways that you can support them. Look out for the Museum Workers Guild. More information will be coming soon, but for right now, please do fill out the survey, which is in our video description. This conversation will be continued next week. A week from today, December 9th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, we'll have a panel of 3 conservators and collections care professionals who are all part of unions. Some are just starting out their careers. Others have been part of unions for over 30 years. Some are on contract. Others are permanent. So we'll continue kind of more in depth with what it is like to be a conservator or a collections care professional in a union. So we do hope you'll join us. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're sorry that we weren't able to get to as many questions. We'll continue answering those questions next week, and we'll also follow up with any questions that don't get answered. The PMA Union, I think there were a number of questions specifically directed towards them, so you can also reach out to them directly. They share their contact info and on their website. So thank you so much for being part of this. Thank you to our ECPN partners. I'll just put a quick plug for PACA. This is a free series. If you enjoyed it and want to see more content like this, please do consider joining PACA, pacaphiladelphia.org. Only $25 for a year-long membership. ECPN has been and always will be free to join, so you can join their various forums. But thank you so much to our speakers, and thank you all for joining us tonight.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anisha. Thank you, PACA.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.